It is great to be back at GIF. I love it. It's like, this is my 4th time now, and I feel like there's so many people that I've met in past GIFs that are back again. It's a bit of a reunion. And what's been brilliant over the last day, almost day and a half now, is just listening to the shared experiences that we've all got as innovators in different contexts. And we're all trying new things out as best we can in our different contexts. And so today, I want to talk to you about MVP, the minimal viable product that we can develop to solve some of those problems that we're facing into. But this is just my opinion. In my opinion, you're going to have opinions today as well. And I think what's really important is that we just really encourage the spirit of learning from each other. So I'm going to tell you what I think, but during the course of the rest of the day, I'd love you guys to come up and tell me what you think as well. And no doubt there'll be some time for questions. But like Tom said, I've spent the last 25 years in the world of branding, packaging for FMCG and consumer tech products. And I'm currently working at CDP, which is a great place to be. I really love it there. And creating minimal viable products is a way of life at CDP. There's 300 of us that come together to do things differently as best we possibly can, find new solutions, find ways of doing things differently every day. And that means that I get to work with all sorts of different people. I myself have been involved in strategy and planning, but I'll be sitting down for lunch one day with an engineer, the next maybe with a physicist, a scientist. You never quite know who you're going to get to work with. And that's a really great thing because we'll need lots of different skills and capabilities if we start to develop really valuable MVPs that can solve problems, right? We've also built the facilities and the space to be able to come and do that. And what I would say is there's some of you who have already been to see us at CDP. It's an open invitation. If you have got problems that you need to solve and you've got a requirement for some support, we'd love to speak to you, okay? If you're a competitor, you can wave to us. If you're a potential client, come and visit us. And so all the things that you're seeing up on the screen now ultimately have been through a process of being prototyped, developed, thought through in lots of different iterations, from the very beginning of an initial seed of an idea all the way through to a high-end prototype, eventually, ideally, hopefully, to market. But we have to start somewhere. We have to start with the minimum viable product. And there's been so many parallels from the talks that people have given. I think it's really encouraging that so many people have talked about their families. I'll do the same very quickly. I'm not a power lifter. You might have guessed that. I haven't taken my kids out of conventional school and had loads of time to teach them how to make incredible things out of cardboard. That's not me. I've just tried to get my kids through the best I possibly can with the conventional tools that I've got. But we do need to innovate, don't we, as parents? We need to think about what are the things that our children are struggling with? How can I help them? What's the different way of doing things? Actually, one of my kids is going to need a very different way of me showing up in their life than another. And I find that so bizarre, isn't it? We have kids, they've come from the same place ultimately, but they can be so different. Their needs are so different. And as you can see, I'm trying my best as a dad. They're not always smiling, but now that they're teenagers, they're teaching me a lot of things as well about how they live in the world and how they operate now as digital natives. They've got a lot of things to teach me. But I remember that when they were young, the thing that used to really inspire me and the thing that I used to love doing is just being messy, being creative, getting all sorts of stuff out and just playing with it, whether it be plasticine, pipe cleaners, paints, you name it. I mean, literally, the playroom would be a total mess. Much to my wife's disdain, I would be the one down there with them getting my hands dirty as well. And that fearless creativity, that fun, that excitement is something that kids can really inspire in us. But as we get older, we kind of lose some of that, right? We start to become a bit more conventional. We see the way that other people are doing things, and I'm totally seeing that now with my teenagers. I mean, they'll grow their hair long, they've got piercing. God knows what's going to happen when I get home tonight. There'll probably be a bunch more piercings, God knows where. But actually, in terms of their attitude and their behavior, as much as they're rebelling in certain ways, they know that there are certain conventions that they want to conform to, because that's how everyone else in their school is doing things, right? And so very quickly we start to get into this situation where we tend to conform. We become much more fearful. And as I look around the room, I recognize that we're all here as adults, and we're probably very time poor. We're rushing around. We don't always have the right tool for the job. And now these are really extreme examples. How many of us actually would use a drill to bang a nail in? Maybe I might have done that when I've not been able to find a hammer. I must admit I have used a fork once to try and eat soup with when I was on a camping trip, and I couldn't find the bloody spoon. But what I'm trying to say here is that ultimately we need to think about what is it that we are seeing and experiencing? When we observe people in the world, when we observe consumers, what are the things that people are doing, the coping mechanisms, the things that they don't have? How can we start to then think about what the right solution is that will actually meet those needs? That's really where we've got to start from. We've got to start from this point of understanding the need. And once we've got the insight, we can then move into bringing the ideas to life. Now, I know that Frank did an amazing sketch workshop yesterday. How many of you were in that workshop session? Put your hands up. Was it good? Yeah? I've heard some great things. I missed it. But I heard some really great things about it. And I think what's awesome about the sketching process is that we quite quickly can go from that idea, that thought that we've had, to trying to get something down on paper that brings it to life, that allows other people to see that idea as well. And so sketching is a really important part of what we do in my workaday world. I am not Leonardo da Vinci. I cannot sketch for toffee. I don't think Frank, with the best will in the world, could teach me how to sketch. But at the same time, it's so important that we find a way to translate our ideas. And what's happening, and what I'm sure you're all starting to experience, is that there is a new kid on the block when it comes to getting our ideas down quickly. I would suggest that maybe AI is starting to democratize the way we visualize and bring things to life. We can all have a thought in this room about an MVP, an idea that we've got, something that we would like to see manifest itself in the world. We can speak that into being. We can ask AI to generate that, and all of a sudden, it's right in front of us. It looks like something that we could potentially go out and buy. Now, that's kind of exciting, but it's kind of scary as well. And I think we're all coming to terms with the idea that, yes, it's important to get our ideas down, but all of a sudden, anyone around the table is able to bring their idea to life. And so we've got to really start to think about, how do we use AI as a tool? It's a leveler. It's leveled the playing field in terms of who can generate and develop that idea. But at the same time, we need to be really thoughtful about what those ideas actually do in terms of translating them to the real world. How do we use AI? That's so important. So I've got a little challenge coming up for you. This is a really good example of how really incongruous things can be brought together. Actually, I would suggest that AI is brilliant at doing this. We wouldn't necessarily think about how we would generate Darth Vader in that way with those sorts of patterns. They're totally incongruous thoughts, the same as bringing Skittles together with Snickers. AI will just do that. It just generates those things. It doesn't have the same parameters that we do in terms of how we make connections. So here's a little test. I'm going to pop up some images on the screen. And what I wanted us to think about is, are these things MVPs that you think are actually real? Are they things that have been put into market that have been tested, or are they just AI generations? First one's coming up. You ready? So this was a limited edition Lego set that was created for IKEA. You can only buy it at IKEA's head office, and you can only buy it at the Lego Superstore in Denmark. Put your hand up if you think this is an actual Lego set. Okay, maybe about 20% of you. Very good. It's not. This is an AI-generated Lego set. This is a Ben & Jerry's iced cream. It's made from the milk that's left over from cereals. Doesn't sound great, doesn't sound particularly appetizing. Put your hands up if you think this is an AI idea. Okay, again, I reckon that's about 40% of you think it's an idea. Those of you that thought it wasn't are correct. This has actually been tried. Taking the leftover milk from cereals, not quite sure how that works. Turning it into ice cream, not for me. Absolute have teamed up with Heinz to create a really punchy sauce. Now, hands up if you think this is real. Wow. Okay, about 50%. It's not. Sorry. Doritos did a mashup with Toblerone. Hands up if you think this is real. 10%, 15%, you're wrong. Last but not least, Heinz do a mashup with Monster Munch to produce Monster Munch flavoured mayonnaise. Hands up if you think this is real. You're right, it's real. But crazy, right? So it's really interesting to see how those AI interpretations made us think some things were quite fanciful, and they were actually real. And so we're in a world now where kind of anything can be visualized. We can start to see very quickly what is desirable. We can test these things with consumers. We can show them straight away, do you like this idea? And we can get a very quick response to something that would have taken us maybe a couple of weeks to really fine-tune and render. It can be done in seconds. And I think what's really exciting but also really dangerous is that AI is giving not just power to us as innovators to create new things, to try new things out, it's also giving a lot of agency to the consumer to make their own thing. We're in a sea of sameness, right? Products are all the same. All of a sudden, we're starting to talk about personalization. Put your hand up in the room if in the last 18 months in your work environment, you have had a conversation about enabling personalization. We're all talking about it, right? It's becoming a big thing. But what happens when people actually get the chance to do it? Now, this example from Gatorade, I think is really interesting. I think it's ballsy. I think it's bold that they're doing this. I think there's probably some brand managers in the room that are quaking in their boots and are getting quite scared about the fact that, what does this mean in future when it comes to us aligning these creative interpretations from consumers with our own brand equity, with what we want to see, with what we want to see out there in the world in terms of how our brand shows up. But we're going to have to start reconsidering maybe some of these conventions. And so even from the point of view now of consumers having much more agency over what they want to see in the world, AI can potentially really help with that. But it also is up to us to decide how to use it as a tool. It is not a solution in and of itself. And of course, if we are developing MVPs for products, if we're developing actual three-dimensional things, we still need to make stuff. And so what's really interesting about the space that we inhabit at CDP is that we are developing products, we are developing physical things, and we're starting with Frankenstein's monsters. We're starting with mashups, things that don't look particularly finessed or gorgeous. We're just starting with the principles of how will this thing work? How will this thing potentially show up in the world? Here's a really interesting example of something just like that, this mashup that ultimately was the very beginning of the Rubik's Cube, something that you could put into someone's hand, they could start to actually play with this MVP to understand the concept behind the Rubik's Cube. A picture could never do that. You have to create something physical. World's first keyboard, Steve Wozniak. I don't want that in my office, but obviously before you can start to style it and make it look beautiful, you need to understand if functionally this thing is going to work. And here's the Wii U, the very beginnings of getting something into the stakeholders' hands, the senior management team. The designers took this and said, this is what we think this could actually look like, this is how it could be. And all of a sudden, that three-dimensional thing creates an emotional attachment. People get to understand fundamentally what it is that you are intending. You can't get that from a visual, but when you're able to hold something, to use something, to play with something, it brings it to life. And I think in our workaday worlds, we're really keen, aren't we, to get that MVP to a point where we can hand it to someone to say, and this is how I think it's gonna operate. I really, really love this example because I think this whole point about being fearless and being creative and just taking some risks, we actually don't see that in our professional world so often, do we? And when it does happen, it's kind of something to celebrate and applaud. And I think this is really ballsy. It was a great interview I heard from the brand managers who were tasked with the idea that during the Christmas season, people ain't eating fried chicken. They've got turkey, they've got ham, but on Christmas Day, very few people frequent KFC. And so the challenge was, how do we get people to reconsider KFC during that period of downtime when they're not buying fried chicken? And so they could have done some kind of special in the restaurant that got people excited about fried chicken in a different way. But instead, these guys decided that what they would do is very, very quickly, very crudely create something, get it to market, and just see how people reacted. Not spending a huge amount of money, very, very low volume. But what ended up happening here is people found out that this was available. It sold out literally within an hour. And it allowed you to actually burn this thing on your fireplace to give you the scent of KFC. Now, I'm not sure I want that in my house on Christmas Day. Some people did. Some people love that brand. Some people got really excited about it. What actually happened, though, for KFC is it created loads of media impressions. That quick MVP that turned to prototype, that turned to something that KFC could use a co-packer, a co-manufacturer to do, enabled them to really change the game, to change the messaging in terms of what their brand was about and how they would show up during that special season. And here's an example of us starting that journey in terms of trying to make something that would start as a piece of engineering that was quite crude, loads of wires everywhere, but we were trying at that point in time to understand, well, what happens with the ice cream if it goes through the machine? Will we be able to maintain the temperature? Will the ice cream be able to come out in the way that we need it to come out? You're having to work all that stuff out before you get anywhere near styling. And very quickly, we went from prototypes in foam to prototypes in plastic, through to what you can see bottom right-hand corner. But what I wanted to mention today is that I think the challenge that we've got with developing our MVPs with clients, client partners, is that maybe we're not always asking some of the tough, difficult questions about where is this actually headed. And in this particular case, yes, we made an object of beauty that was absolutely loved. It was desirable, it was feasible, and it was really celebrated by the client team. But ultimately, the challenge is that there's a lot of due diligence that's needed to be done in terms of whether things are viable. Are we at the moment all developing things and thinking about things that we think are a great idea, but how much time have we spent talking to our colleagues in supply chain, in procurement, about whether this has actually got legs long term? Can we scale this? Can we make it happen? And this is a good example, I think, of something that ultimately ticked those boxes in terms of desirable, feasible, but it just couldn't be scalable. It wasn't viable for the business long term. Viable is key. And I think if we can start to think about how do we make sure that we've built some of that thinking in early on, people within our business won't press the red button. And we know that that could happen any time, right? You might have been working on something for the last 6 months, the last year, maybe the last 2 or 3. And unless we can solve this challenge around, are we working on something that's really going to be viable long term, the whole thing could be scrapped. And so a lot of the time that I'm spending these days is actually helping clients on that journey, not just in terms of developing the idea, making sure it's desirable, making sure it's feasible, but asking the tough questions around, is this truly viable? As a business, do you really want to be doing this? And making sure that there isn't the R&D director and the marketing director in the room alone, but actually, have we got everyone in the room that is going to be required to make a decision about whether we're going to invest in it? So important and really critical to do this early on. And we sometimes build this in at the very beginning of our projects. We call it brief the brief. And we're trying to make sure that we have got all those things, all those boxes, at least scribed, even if they're not ticked, so we know exactly what we're aiming for. What is the target? What are we trying to achieve? This is Uka. It is a modern-day shisha pipe. And for this particular prototype, for this particular product, rather, you can see that we've been through the iteration of sketches, of foam models, of high-end animations to really onboard the client team. But we've also been through that journey with them at this stage on how are you going to make this work in the marketplace? Is it going to be viable? And we got the chance to look at every single touch point with them, from the very early idea, from the very beginning of the concept, all the way through to how it was going to be packaged, how it was actually going to get to market. And in this particular instance, it's a great success story. It's going great guns, and we know that there's going to be lots more development in this space. Ultimately, they wanted to generate something that was like the Nespresso of vaping, and they've been incredibly happy with the success, but also really happy with the results in market. And let me finish on this. So this is probably one of the most complicated prototypes that we have ever been involved in building as a business. It's a surgical robot for minimal invasive surgery, incredibly detailed. Of those 300 engineers, scientists, experts that I talked about up front, all involved ultimately in making something that was incredibly complicated. But I think the key thing that I want to bring you back to today is that it starts here. Unless we're willing to go get our hands dirty and start to think about the minimal viable product, how's it going to work, we're never going to get to a level of sophistication like that if we're not able to spend time, effort, and energy in working out the basics. And that's such an important part of what we do. Before it gets sexy, before it gets wonderful, before it gets scientifically realized in all of that detail, we have to start somewhere pretty crude. So a couple of leave-behinds, minimal viable products, in my opinion. Well, MVPs really are about iterating in terms of testing. Make sure that when you're building your plan, your budget, you've actually made sure that there is time and money set aside, not just for one or two of these things, but for multiple iterations of what it is you're intending to develop. AI is exciting, we're all into it, it's very much engaging, but actually, how are we using it as a tool? It is a tool. We shouldn't let it dominate our thinking. We should marshal its abilities and make sure that it's working for us. It can't create the physical prototypes, not yet anyway. So it's going to take a lot of expertise you're going to need to go from that thing that looked glorious to the thing that actually is able to operate and work in the real world in 3D. And maybe most importantly is don't lose sight of viability. Don't let that critical question that sometimes just gets tucked away to the end becomes the thing that derails the project 3, 4, 6 months or 2 years into the process. Start to ask those questions, have those conversations with your colleagues who are going to be part of that decision-making process up front. That's me. I'm done. Thank you so much for your time.